You're listening to episode 185 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Sarah Barker joins us again, this time with her husband, the intrepid Bruce Barker, to speak about their latest project about secularism in Los Angeles, You Are Here TV. Secularism is still in its infancy here in the U.S., at least as far as mainstream culture is concerned with using that name. Of course, we're interested in how Buddhism is finding new and fertile soil in which to grow with secular culture. And to do that, it would be helpful to have a more robust understanding of how other people are finding secular worldview is integrating with their lives. Sarah Barker has always believed that truth makes for much more enticing storytelling than fiction. Sarah is the creator of You Are Here TV, a documentary web series that explores the rich, varied, and rapidly growing secular community in Los Angeles. Sarah holds an MFA in film production from Chapman University's prestigious Dodge College of Film and Television, and worked in the television industry for both Technicolor and HBO, for many years as an ADR and dialogue editor. She is also a freelance filmmaker, documentarian, and producer, writer, editor with RightAfterThis.com, broadcast production and creative. Sarah is currently in post-production with more episodes of You Are Here TV and a feature documentary, Atheist Camp, currently in pre-production. Sarah has taught radio, television, and film production for over 10 years, and served as the head of the Media Communications Department with Genesee Community College in Western New York. Currently, Sarah is television and radio production faculty with Pasadena City College in Pasadena, California. Bruce Barker entered the audio production and voiceover fields as a teenager, initially in radio. His first live TV appearance, at age 15, was behind the scenes, operating huge surplus RCA television cameras for the local small-town evening news. Fast forward to the present, where Bruce has been heard nationally on commercials for Hyundai USA, Activision, Pacific Life Insurance, and Kroger Supermarkets, to name but a few. He's done extensive sound mixing for theater productions and radio programs, including the American Dream radio series, heard throughout the world on the Armed Forces Network. Bruce handles the bulk of the graphics and animation work for RightAfterThis.com's video wing and serves as technical support for the company's live broadcast and streaming arenas. So sit back, relax, and have a nice Romulan ale. Our guests today are returning Sarah Barker. Sarah, nice to speak with you again.
Nice to speak with you. Thank you.
And your intrepid husband, Bruce Barker. Bruce, thanks for joining us. Nice to meet you.
Oh, look at me. Now I need a T-shirt that says Intrepid.
People might mistake you for a starship.
The SS Intrepid.
The SS Intrepid. That's or the BB Intrepid.
Nicely done.
I think there's a Star Trek font in this and a T-shirt. Your future, just a guess. So before we get into our topic today, yes, I'm going to ask, and yes, you have to tell the story, the romance. How did you two meet?
Oh boy, who
who's gonna
leads
take
this one off?
one? I don't know.
We both ask each other. Okay, how about, let's see, I'll lead off. Okay, so just so you know, here's a little backstory. Locally, I have a voice agent, and the office in which they're located, I go there once in a while. I show up all bedraggled, messed up, and I mean, you got to look that way when you have the top down. Although I don't have the top down as much as I used to, but that's another story. But so I walk in this place, and lo and behold, I didn't know it at the time, but here was this goddess who was the studio manager, who you never expect this in real life, but she was unattached, shall we say. And, I was figuring, look, there's 20 guys that have asked her out just today alone.
Before breakfast, even.
Exactly. So I'm not going to bother. I'll just come in. I'll do my little, voice thing or audition or whatever it was at the agents, which I did show up there occasionally, still do. And then actually one day Sarah made the first move, and I'm flabbergasted. I'm thinking there's no way. She must be thinking I'm the next guy who walked in.
A girl can't wait forever.
I guess it was a lesson to me. I'm not sure what the lesson was, but it was welcome.
So, Sarah, how honest a retelling of the venture was that?
I'm just glad it's radio, so you can't see the blush, but it's really accurate. I waited for Bruce to ask me out for too many months, and I finally said, you know what, this is the 21st century. I can.
Yeah, wow, it worked out just wonderfully, obviously, but yeah, that was a big surprise. You go into things like that thinking, well, you know the old phrase, she's out of my league. But what do you know?
So as we mentioned in our last conversation about the Sunday Assembly, you have a production company called Right After This. How did that get started?
Well, it dates back a little bit. You probably hear a little radio, twang or something or other in my voice. Way back in the dark ages, I was just specifically radio and got into doing voice work in the 90s for cable television. And as the 2000s dawned, it suddenly occurred to me that, there's probably a lot more voice work going on than just the local cable channel where you're talking about dry cleaners and shouting about the great used cars down at Joe's Car Lot. And about that same time, we'd put in a bid on some radio equipment that had been in use at Universal Studios Hollywood. And this bid was kind of just sort of backdoored. I don't think anybody else was even informed that the stuff was up for bid. Lo and behold, it was this monstrous studio setup they'd had for about 2 years at Universal Studios. They had dismantled it, put it in a warehouse. Then, one day this thing comes in and says, hey, Bruce, we know you used this equipment once at Universal. Do you want to put a bid on it? Well, sure. So all of a sudden, then we had an office full of equipment and no office. So, found an office locally here in the LA area and set up shop and said, all right, let's start a production company. So that was about 2001 or thereabouts. And it just kind of grew from there. Originally, it was audio only. About 4 or 5 years ago, we started doing video as well as a production company. Obviously, Sarah had done tons of that prior to that. But, as a company with a presence and a brick and mortar shop, as it were. And it's just been growing leaps and bounds.
Sarah, what do you want to add to that?
It's just been such a treat. I came from television, from working in television, first for Technicolor, so it was kind of a bigger studio system, and then a boutique industry, kind of a mom and pop post-production shop, which is really common out here in LA. It's kind of two different ways of working. And this has been really refreshing because, now when we get hired to do video work, I mean, yes, we're beholden to clients, but I mean, it's very creative. You have a lot of creative license to work and to find a way to tell a story that's really effective. And the client typically will trust you with that because they know that that's what you do. And it's just been such a treat and really refreshing because I went to film school, and that's really what I wanted for my life when I went to film school. And when I came out on the other side, I did a long stint in TV, and it wasn't as creative as I thought it was going to be working in television. It was actually kind of like putting the lettuce or the tomato on the hamburger. So this has just been really rewarding to be highly creative.
Excellent. Well, what we're going to talk about today is your project, You Are Here TV. So what is that, and what made you decide to do it?
Okay, well, it's kind of a crazy story, and it all really kind of begins with one of my dearest friends, she who shall not go named, but I adore her dearly. I remember many years ago, a book called The Secret came out, and it was just sweeping the nation. And, Oprah had it on her show, and it was just this huge kind of cultural meme, and everybody was glomming on to this. You can use your mind to create reality, and people were
law of attraction.
The law of attraction, right? So this book comes out, and my girlfriend and I bought it, and we're checking it out, and I was completely appalled because I had been studying Buddhism for many, many years, and I thought, well, this is just basically, I don't know if I'm allowed to say bastardizing. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
You can on a podcast.
I can on your podcast. Okay,
you can on this podcast, yeah.
Oh, great. It was basically, to me, it was bastardizing Buddhism. It was just this idea of I can meditate and I can create diamond rings and sports cars and the man of my dreams. And I decided I wanted to set out to create a film to debunk it. And so I located this Church of Science of Mind, which is really where The Secret comes from. It comes from Church of Religious Science and Science of Mind, which, sprung up in the late 1800s, and then it had a resurgence in the early 50s with Ernest Holmes. And I started making a film about this particular organization. And as strange as it might sound, it kind of helped me to come out to myself about my secularist tendencies. And it went from being a documentary, a feature documentary to debunk The Secret to, I want to make a show about secularism and about how religion is changing and it's moving away from conventional religion because I think we're outgrowing it. I think we're outgrowing as a species and as a culture. I believe that we're outgrowing conventional religion. And so it kind of just morphed and it became something else. And now it's really, now it's really become for me a show about secularism in Los Angeles and what that actually looks like. And it really doesn't look anything like what I think a lot of people believe about humanists, which is that we're heathenistic, we're immoral, we don't care about anybody but ourselves, or they think Ayn Rand, they think the Fountainhead, they think this kind of crazy social, So I really kind of wanted to present another way to look at what it means to be an atheist, and that it's you can still do good works, you can still be of service in your community. You just don't believe in a God concept.
Yeah, you're still a human being. You still love. You still are inspired. You can still inspire others. You still find value in being a person and living and being with others.
Right. Yeah. It's just a lack of belief in something that's potentially superstitious.
So, Sarah, with your awareness yourself of your secularism and facing that while having a Buddhist practice, was there any kind of transition, or was that somewhat difficult for you? Were there a few things that helped you sort out in being a Buddhist and doing this practice?
Well, yeah. And, it's funny because I know we're going to be, getting to the episode I just finished later, but it's going to eventually kind of be a good segue because really so much of how all this happened for me, and I'm pretty open about this and I talk about it pretty freely, but I'm a recovering bulimic, and I was in a 12-step program for bulimia for about 19 years. I got in very early when I was 19 or 20. I got into a 12-step program to help me with my eating disorder. And for years, I tried to reconcile the 12-step program. Really, it's a spiritual program. And, the idea, and this is pretty clearly articulated in the first couple of steps, is that you come to believe in a power greater than yourself who will restore you to sanity. And that's virtually verbatim, the second step of the program. So I'm in this program, and I'm really trying to make myself believe in this higher power. And, when I first got in, I was living up in Humboldt County, which is a crazy, hippie, marvelous, wacky town. And it was a good place for someone like me to begin my 12-step recovery, because there nobody ever talked about God. They would talk about the trees, they would talk about the redwoods. And at that time, that was accessible to me, and that was my higher power. When I moved back down to this area, Los Angeles, it was a very different dynamic at meetings. And there was a lot of God. There was a lot of God present in the rooms that I was sitting in. And I stayed and I tried to make it work and I tried to reconcile it. And every once in a while I would speak openly about my struggle with the second step. And I would feel this I felt like a pariah in the rooms, And about that time, and this would have been about 10 years ago, I started studying Tibetan Buddhism. I found a Tibetan Buddhist Sangha here in my area. And I attended for several years. And it was really transformative for me. I learned how to meditate. I learned how to pull myself into my body and be present and be mindful, be paying attention to what's happening in my body. This was really great for my recovery in a lot of ways, although I still really struggled. But there was too much religiosity for me in that particular, I guess, sect of Buddhism. So I found another organization that was more secular in nature. And I think between what was happening for me in the 12 steps and what I was feeling happening to me and trying to work these steps in a program that's religious, but and also at the same time really sinking into a Buddhist practice and really kind of, I guess you could say, coming to believe that there isn't a higher power that can, that I don't need to be restored to sanity. I'm already sane, and that what I'm experiencing is actually just the human condition, that it's not that nothing sane about it. And I think between those two things, I really started to, understand who I was, or what did make sense to me, or how I wanted to look at the world, the universe, and my place in it. And I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, it was a couple things coming together that created it, I think.
So how are you dividing up the workload for the show, Bruce? I understand you have quite a few hats that you wear.
Yeah, and some of them are funny hats and some of them are serious hats. I sort of came in on this sort of obliquely, I think, because, Sarah is definitely the storyteller. She's the one. I mean, I'm talking just everything from camera angles to, the story ideas to a whole lot of the real basic stuff that you put together, on a series like this that, that makes it not just watchable, but interesting, things that you want to keep following. You see one episode and you go, I got to see another one of those. I was able to lend expertise, I think, in a few different areas. The main one that you will notice is I tend to be sort of a stand-up on-camera guy, just, sort of the interstitial guy, the narrator, whatever the position would be, sort of talking about the subject, transitioning from one scene to the next, that sort of thing, sort of explaining things as it goes. Kind of a typical narrator or a host type figure in some of these episodes. But then behind the scenes, I also supply some graphics expertise. I'm one of these guys who likes. I'm a gear nut. That applies to the physical gear in terms of anything from gadgetry to carburetors to whatever, but as well software and figuring out how things work. So I got into animation quite a while ago when Macintoshes were still black and white.
And RenderMan 1.0 was out.
Exactly. But so I've been able to lend some help there as well, and some help in terms of sound, because my background, Sarah's as well, my background, very much of it is in editing and sound and reproduction of audio, and some of the various aspects there. A lot of it from the commercial world, which lends itself really well to film and narrative documentaries. So yeah, it's a lot of hats, but I kind of like it that way, because it lets you exercise more of your muscles, as it were. It's nice to be able to lend all 5 fingers of one hand rather than just one. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, you can be more creative in your exploration of those different aspects of what you contribute to the overall project.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, it really is creative, because I can't think of, Sarah mentioned a while ago about putting the lettuce and the tomato on the hamburger at the fast food joint. And, a lot of my experience in radio was the same. There's a lot of manual assembly of things where you have no creative control. And that's not to say so much on air necessarily, although with the big corporations, it really kind of is that way on air now. But certainly in making radio commercials, a lot of that stuff is dictated by a copywriter or some other person involved in the project. So by the time it gets to you as the production person, the person who's actually assembling it, even if you're voicing it or having somebody else do that, you don't have a lot of creative control. So when you're building a project from ground zero, from the ground up, it's wonderful, because you can just toss around ideas and go, well, let's see if this works. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it allows you to sort of experiment and get some new ideas out there, which in regular production life you don't get to do.
So it's early on. You've just completed your 3rd episode. Tell us what your subjects have been so far.
Because the show originally wasn't going to be a show, it was going to be a feature. The first 2 episodes are actually the same topic, but it's 2 parts, because I had so much material that I realized, wow, this is too long. It's a documentary web series, which I'm hoping to get picked up, but right now it's a documentary web series. And so it was really too long for web delivery. So I basically split it up, but it was about the Church of Science of Mind, this where the law of attraction comes from, this whole idea of, we don't really believe in God, we believe in energy. We believe in love, love is God is kind of I think the ideology behind it. And initially I had planned on taking the perspective of, I think I mentioned earlier, of kind of a basher, but I just decided to just take the high road and, keep the emphasis on, if you watch it, we kind of raise some questions around, well, if it's not God, if it's energy, then why don't you just call it energy? I mean, why don't you just, I'm sure we can all agree that energy exists. I can flip a light switch and the light comes on. Yeah, energy exists. We raised some questions like that, but for the most part, we just kind of let the whole story play out. And what we did is I found a guy named Harry Moses, who's a Science of Mind minister here in Burbank, and we also went to this really kooky expo. It was a New Age expo, and that was just wild. It was just really out there. Some of the it's really interesting to see how some of the new American religions that have come out of the last maybe 100 years or so, Scientology and Church of Religious Science, Science of Mind, they're all just really, some of them are just really kooky. But to me, it's an outcropping of, I don't know that we really can connect as much as we used to the conventional idea of some guy with a long white beard and a staff sitting on a throne, intervening in your life constantly, judging you. I think that we're kind of, as a culture, finding ways to make more meaning or to understand, quote unquote, God in a different way. And I find that interesting. And, what I believe personally is that eventually God might disappear. What I want to play around with is, did God create us or do we create God? And I think that that's really what I'm wanting to explore a little bit and look at.
And so that's the first couple of episodes, and the third one you're putting out. What about that one?
That one actually is about an organization called the Secular Organizations for Sobriety. This is a story of a guy who actually has a really similar story to my own, and I think that's what appealed to me so much about the topic was I really could relate to his trajectory. But he was a serious alcoholic, really kind of losing everything, lost his wife and, just life falling apart, alcoholic. And he is an atheist. And he tried to do a lot of different things. He tried therapy, Gestalt therapy, inpatient treatment, and he also tried AA, for many years, and just couldn't make it work. He just couldn't resonate with the spirituality of the program. And so he went out and he started basically in his kitchen. And it's funny because the way it started was a lot like the way AA started. It started in his house on his kitchen table. He developed a support group for alcoholics, addicts, compulsive eaters, Al-Anon, folks who are friends and family of alcoholics. They're all welcome at the same meetings. And he started these meetings that were secular in nature. And it's interesting, he and one of the meetings in our area were kind enough to allow us to come in and film the meeting. And we just blurred likeness so that no one appeared in the show and, their anonymity was protected. But what was really interesting is that not everybody that goes to these meetings are secular. So for some of them, they're religious. They just don't want to bring that into their recovery, or they don't like the idea of a sponsor or having to rely on someone else to make decisions for them or to tell, there's other aspects of the 12 steps that they're struggling with. And so they do this, Secular Organization for Sobriety, and it's been around now for about 35 years. It's international now. It's all over the world. And the Center for Inquiry, actually, the National Center for Inquiry, has been financially supporting it, although they've now been cut off. So SOS runs the risk of disappearing forever if we can't raise them some money. And the founder, Jim Christopher, has been sober for 35 years. So, obviously you don't need God to get sober, is the moral of that one, I think. But it's a really great alternative if you're struggling with addiction, but you're having a hard time with the religiosity of the 12-step model.
It's interesting that you bring up that there are religious people there as well, because I see that as one of the strengths of a secular approach in a lot of things, like Buddhism, for example, or these kinds of programs that with a secular approach, it focuses on what we do know as human beings in this lifetime. And what you believe about spiritual matters can be independent of that. It can be highly integrated into how you live your life. But what we do focus on with secular matters is you. And that still carries over whether or not you're of a particular religious faith, that it still works with these kinds of programs because it's based on what you are as a human being.
Yeah, that's enough, it seems like. Just this one lifetime is plenty.
It can be long, yeah. Anything surprising to you yet in just the bit of work that you're doing? And bear in mind, it's early on in this venture. You have lots more coming, but anything surprising come up yet?
This has been such an amazing experience for me. I have learned a lot. I think probably the biggest thing that I'm learning is that, within the secular community, there's a lot of different approaches to it. I think it's kind of like being a little kid, and then when you become a teenager, or maybe you get your first hair on your chest, or, whatever that rite of passage is for a teen, suddenly you think you know everything about what it means to be X, a grown up or a teenager or whatever. And I kind of feel like once I finally admitted to myself and to others that I was, in fact, an atheist, I really thought that atheism looked a certain way and it was called atheism. And even though I had heard of the terms humanism and secularism, I always kind of wrote them off because I thought that they all meant the same thing. And I think what people are teaching me is that there are nuances between those terms, that vernacular, that are important to people and that people really value, and that there are really hardline atheists. And then there are people who are a little bit softer around it. And then the term agnostic is a little bit more nebulous than I once realized. And it's just, I'm kind of learning that there's a lot of complexity around what it means to be secular. And my take on that is that I kind of feel like we're still exploring it as a culture. It's kind of a new, well, in terms of it being, it's growing. But I think, in LA, what I see in LA is that it's growing really fast. And I think that we're all still trying to figure it out, what it means, what it means in the context of culture, what it means in the context of community, what it means in the context of parenting. So it's been interesting. It's been really educational for me so far.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if even with folks who are very much in agreement about their approach to secularism, there's still variety as individuals in how they communicate it and how they integrate it with their lives.
Yeah, it's very personal. But I'm also seeing that there's this need. I think when we came on, I talked to you not too long ago on an episode about another community that's starting. And there does seem to be this desire to make more community around it. And I don't know if this is because I come from secular Buddhism, where I kind of feel like Buddhists are a little bit more internal. And not to say that community is not important, but I don't know that in my experiences, community may not be as important as, let's say, that it might be for like a Christian or, somebody who's, it's a very shared experience, whereas Buddhism seems a little bit more internal.
So how are your guests responding to the show?
Really, really well. And you're right. This is really kind of new. I haven't been doing this for too long, but the first couple of episodes, the response was interesting. And I think it was interesting because they knew that I was secular. And there was I sensed a little bit of mistrust from some folks that they were going to be painted in a certain light because I wasn't one of them. I would say from the secular community, because I'm in production with episode 4, and I've kind of been doing a lot of shooting. Bruce and I have been doing a lot of shooting this last year because we were shooting for a couple of episodes. And from the secular community, it's just been very receptive. And also what I seem to be hearing a lot of is, we really need more of this. We need more of this. We need to get this out there. We need more of this. Why aren't more people doing this? And that's a great question. I think that there are a lot of people doing this. Maybe not exactly the way that I'm doing it, maybe not investigative documentary style, but I think that there's a lot of content out there around secularism. But there seems to be a lot of warmth and receptivity to it. I haven't really come across anything to the contrary there. I suspect the project that I want to work on in the summer, which will be a feature, I probably will come against a lot more pushback because of the topic. But so far it's been kind of easy to get people to talk to me. And I thought that people might be a little bit more reticent to talk about their secularism because it's such a boo, scary boo kind of notion. But that hasn't been my experience. They seem to enjoy really opening up about it and talking about it freely.
Yeah, and that may vary based on where people are. I know some listeners that we have to this podcast are still very much in the closet based on their physical location in the country, where really secularism is not a good thing. They're in the Bible Belt and they really can't come out as anything but a devout Christian, even though they're not.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But where you are, yeah, things may be okay. So I'll keep fingers crossed for you. So what is it that you're each hoping people get out of the show?
I've always viewed this as this is a great exploration into the unknown. I know that sounds big, and you mentioned Star Trek a long time ago. It sort of feels like, if I say a word like that, it's like, oh yeah, well, we're warp 5, Mr. Sulu. But it has been very interesting, at least for me to be able to hear people's stories, where they came from, how lives sort of integrate into the social norm, which is very much of a sort of a religious net that our society is based on. To see people, how they deal with things that are maybe overt and offensive to some, and as well people that are just kind of walking through life, and you see 100 people lined up on a city street, and you can't point to who's going to believe in what, or what somebody had for dinner, or anything, unless you ask. And this has been great because we've had so many great people talk about their lives and their story, their struggle, if they've had struggle. And, Sarah's right in the sense that there's been so many people willing to talk. We've probably had more challenges just setting up camera shots than we have getting people to talk to us. It's been really great for that sense, I think. Sarah,
how about you? What are you hoping people get out of this?
I really am hoping that it'll just kind of open a little window. And, that's one of the things I'm kind of struggling with right now with the show is, who is my audience? Because part of me is like, well, I want to make this for fellow secularists, but that's kind of preaching to the choir, as it were. So I would be nice if this could actually be targeting folks who aren't necessarily secular, because I really kind of feel like if this show could maybe plant a seed in the mind of someone who was a very devout religious person, that secular, humanist, atheist, whatever you choose to call yourself, I believe we have a lot more in common with a devout Christian or a devout Jew or a devout Catholic or a Muslim than we don't have in common. I think that basic human need for fellowship, the basic human need for love, to love one another, to help one another, I think that's innate. I think it is part of our DNA. I think it's potentially part of our evolutionary makeup, just the basic need to, I don't know, whatever. I don't want to get too not lovey-dovey, but, I think that we have more in common than we don't have in common. And, initially I wanted to bash The Secret. Well, now I kind of just want to obliterate the concept around atheism, that it's not a bad word, and that if you identify as one, it doesn't make you this cold-hearted fascist, or, it doesn't make you anything at all. It just means that you need proof. So that's my hope for it.
For folks who are listening to this podcast, you can find out more about this at www.youareheretv.tv and www.rightafterthis.com for the production company. Our guests today have been Sarah Barker. Sarah, thanks for being here. Nice to speak with you again.
Thank you so much, Ted.
And Bruce Barker. Bruce, thanks for joining us.
Oh, man, my pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.